Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan in order to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. And as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop. Thanks to President Trump's bold and visionary leadership and his commitment to peace through strength, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen. And the U.S. military, we can back it up. The most powerful military the world has ever known. No other country on planet Earth could have conducted the operation that the chairman is going to outline this morning. Not even close. Just like Soleimani found out in the first term, Iran found out when POTUS says 60 days that he seeks peace and negotiation, he means 60 days of peace and negotiation. Otherwise, that nuclear program, that nuclear capability will not exist. He meant it. This is not the previous administration. The President Trump said no nukes. He seeks peace, and Iran should take that path. He sent out a truth last night saying this: any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Signed, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Iran would be smart to heed those words. He's said it before, and he means it. I want to give recognition to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Staff, General Eric Kurilla at CENTCOM, who did a phenomenal job, he and his staff. All of CENTCOM, policy, across the board. This was a joint effort, and across the Pentagon effort. I want to recognize the pilots who flew those bombers, who flew those fighters, who flew those refuelers, warriors. I want to recognize the sailors on those destroyers, in those subs, on those carriers, warriors, all of them. I want to recognize our soldiers doing air defense, base defense, QRF, warriors, all of them. Every American involved in this operation performed flawlessly. And I want to give recognition to our allies in Israel as well. This is a plan that took months and weeks of positioning and preparation so that we could be ready when the President of the United States called. It took a great deal of precision. It involved misdirection and the highest of operational security. Our B-2s went in and out of downtown Tehran, of these nuclear sites, in and out and back without the world knowing at all. In that way, it was historic. A strike that included the longest B-2 Spirit bomber mission since 2001 and the first operational employment of the MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator. The mission demonstrated to the world the level of joint and allied integration that speak to the strength of our alliance and our joint forces. As President Trump has stated, the United States does not seek war. But let me be clear. We will act swiftly and decisively when our people, our partners, or our interests are threatened. Iran should listen to the President of the United States and know that he means it, every word. I want to give congratulations to our Commander-in-Chief. It was an honor to watch him lead last night and throughout, and to our great American warriors on this successful operation. God bless our troops. God bless America. And we give glory to God for his providence and continue to ask for his protection. I turn it over now to the chairman for specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for recognizing all of our folks out there doing our nation's work, and nice to see everybody on this early Sunday morning. Last night on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command, under the command of General Eric Kurilla, executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This was a complex and high-risk mission carried out with exceptional skill and discipline by our joint force. I want to thank every service member, planner, operator that made this mission possible. Their actions reflect the highest standards of the United States Armed Forces. This operation was designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapons infrastructure. It was planned and executed across multiple domains and theaters with coordination that reflects our ability to project power globally with speed and precision at the time and place of our nation's choosing. This was a highly classified mission with very few people in Washington knowing the timing or nature of this plan. I'll refer you to the graphic on the side as I walk you through some of the operational details. At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of a plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy, a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. The main strike package, comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. This type of integration is exactly what our joint force does better than anyone else in the world. At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, and just prior to the strike package entering Iran, a U.S. submarine in the Central Command Area of Responsibility launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against key surface infrastructure targets at Esfahan. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. The strike package was supported by U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. European Command. As the strike package approached Fordo and Natanz, the U.S. protection package employed high-speed suppression weapons to ensure safe passage of the strike package, with fighter assets employing preemptive suppressing fires against any potential Iranian surface-to-air threats. We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. strike package on the way in. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the President stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation. Following weapons release, the Midnight Hammer strike package exited Iranian airspace and the package began its return home. We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the President stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon. I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all three sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of fourth and fifth generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11. Well prior to the strike, General Kurilla elevated force protection measures across the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Our forces remain on high alert and are fully postured to respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks, which would be an incredibly poor choice. We will defend ourselves. The safety of our service members and civilians remains our highest priority. This mission demonstrates the unmatched reach, coordination, and capability of the United States military. In just a matter of weeks, this went from strategic planning to global execution. This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military. As the President clearly said last night, no other military in the world could have done this. I join the President and the Secretary in being incredibly proud of the air crews, naval forces, cyber operators, planners, and support teams, and commanders who made this mission possible. It is their skill, discipline, and teamwork that makes this operation possible. I am particularly proud of our discipline related to operational security, something that was of great concern to the President, the Secretary, General Kurilla, and me, and we will continue to focus on this. As we stand here this morning, many assets are still airborne, and we have hundreds deployed. I ask that we keep our warfighters on their way home and our deployed service member in our thoughts. Our joint force remains ready to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests in the region. Thank you very much.
We will take a few questions. Phil.
Me?
Yeah.
So, is regime change off the table, Mr. Secretary? And to the chairman, you said the battle damage assessment is still ongoing, but do you believe that some nuclear capability in Iran remains?
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The President authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
Thanks for your question. I think BDA is still pending, and it would be way too early for me to comment on what may or may not still be there. But thanks for the question.
Green. No, behind you.
Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, can you tell me, was there a particular moment when the president decided to pull the trigger on this operation where he said, now, rather than being, something in the holster, now we're going to pull the trigger on it?
I would just say, having the opportunity to witness his leadership, he was fully committed to the peace process, wanted a negotiated outcome, gave Iran every single opportunity, and unfortunately was met by stonewalling, which is why he gave them plenty of time to continue to come to the table and give up enrichment, give up the nuclear program. But there was I won't say the particular moment, there was certainly a moment in time where he realized that it had to be a certain action taken in order to minimize the threat to us and our troops. Yeah.
General, you say that...
And once again, you're watching an ABC News special report. This is a press briefing from the Pentagon happening right now. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Caine, talking to reporters right now about this historic and extraordinary strike on Iran. The U.S. carrying out military strikes on 3 separate nuclear facilities. Defense Secretary Hegseth saying it was an incredible, overwhelming success. Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated, and praising President Trump for what he called a plan that was bold and brilliant. He also there at the end, you heard some questions from reporters, the Defense Secretary saying the mission was not about regime change, but overall throughout this press conference talking about these extraordinary details. This was the largest use of B-2 bombers in American history. It was also the first use of those massive ordnance penetrators, or what they call MOPs. These are those bunker-busting bombs that only the United States has. The only armed military in the whole world that has these types of bombs that can penetrate deep into these nuclear facilities. More than 125 aircraft participated in this mission. Let's go ahead and bring in our ABC News contributor, former Marine Colonel Steve Ganyard, who has also been a Defense and State Department official. And Colonel Ganyard, one thing that we heard over and over in this press conference, it was a decoy, deception effort, and the element of surprise.
Yeah, Whit, and I think we talked about this last night, where everybody was caught off guard. So the operational security here was actually quite extraordinary. So we were seeing reports on Friday that there was a wave of B-2s that was coming across the Pacific. So all eyes were looking at what might be happening. Are those B-2s going to Guam? Meanwhile, the 7 B-2s that were used in this strike took off and headed east and came across the Atlantic through the Mediterranean. And so everybody's looking over here. They snuck in and nobody knew, so good OPSEC on the Pentagon side. I think the other thing that strikes me here, Whit, is the number of aircraft involved. 125, as you said. So this was not just a few B-2s flying over a target and some Tomahawks. There were likely F-22s, F-35s, F-15s that were out in front escorting the B-2s over the target area. There were preemptive drops of ordnance on surface-to-air missile sites. They were shooting missiles that actually home in on missile sites. So this was quite a huge, extensive practice project, and so really quite remarkable.
Steve Ganyard, stand by for a moment. We just want to go back to the Pentagon. This press briefing is still underway, and they're answering some questions from reporters. Let's listen in, and then we'll chat on the backside.
They can't have, but President Trump has said from over 20 years, frankly, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And ultimately, he decided this is the moment, given their stonewalling, when direct military action had to be taken to prevent that from happening. Yes.
Thank you very much. General Caine, I understand OPSEC, I respect OPSEC. Can you say at all what security procedures are being taken to protect U.S. troops in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East? And Secretary Hegseth, as a global war on terrorism veteran, what do you say to veterans who may be concerned the U.S. is getting into another open-ended war in the Middle East over weapons of mass destruction?
Thanks, sir, for the question. I won't comment on what force protection measures are being taken in the region. What I will say is we're being proactive and not reactive, and being very thoughtful about ensuring that we do all that we can to protect our forces out there.
And I would just say, as the president has directed and made clear, this is most certainly not open-ended. It doesn't mean it limits our ability to respond. We will respond if necessary. The most powerful military in the world is postured and prepared to defend our people. But what the president gave us, as I said, was a focused, powerful, and clear mission on the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities. Those were the targets. That's what was struck. That's what was overwhelming. That's what was overwhelming. That's what the Iranian regime needs to understand, as the president put out last night. He wants peace. There needs to be a negotiated settlement here. We ultimately demonstrated that Iran cannot have a nuclear capability. That is a very clear mission set on this operation. Yes, hold on. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Question for the Secretary and the Chairman. How was this strike coordinated with the Israelis on a strategic level, militarily, and on a tactical level? Was there any direct Israeli military participation in this operation?
Well, I would say certainly Israel had an incredible military success, especially at the beginning and ongoing, in degrading Iranian capabilities, in degrading Iranian launchers, MRBMs. It's been incredible to watch what our ally Israel has been able to do. And there certainly have been conversations. I mean, General Kurilla at CENTCOM has worked closely in the defense of Israel for many years. And part of this operation was the defense of Israel and the ongoing defense of Israel. But as it pertains to this strike, this was U.S. operated and U.S. led.
We took advantage of some of the preparatory work that's been done over the past week and a half in terms of axis of approach. I won't get into the particulars, but as the Secretary said, it was a U.S. strike. We made sure we were not in the same piece of airspace and sky. Aside from that, that was the extent of it.
We'll take a couple more. Yeah, right there.
Question to the Secretary first. Are you concerned whatsoever now about the reaction from U.S. allies given the strike, particularly those in the Gulf? And to the Chairman, if I may, I understand you don't want to speak to specific assets and force protection measures, but do you anticipate at least having to bring in any further assets from other theaters to aid in force protection over the coming days?
We certainly understand the challenges of allies in the region, and we have been respectful and in working in collaboration with them as it pertains to basing and sensitivities there. Ultimately, they've got a lot of assets and people in those locations also where American troops are co-located. So that's a consideration of ours. We've been in close consultation with them, and we appreciate the support that we have got.
Thanks for the question on sort of the global picture. And as you know, that's one of my jobs, is to look globally at the entire range of challenges. We are always carefully considering our force posture around the world and then offering options to the Secretary and to the President. I won't comment on any future things, but the American people should know that we carefully consider those moves around the world and try to modulate as needed our force structure in the region.
Absolutely. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. What communications are being sent to the Iranians right now, and is there any possibility of diplomacy now or in the coming days?
I can only confirm that there are both public and private messages being directly delivered to the Iranians in multiple channels, giving them every opportunity to come to the table. They understand precisely what the American position is, precisely what steps they can take to allow for peace, and we hope they do so. Yes.
The president may not want an open-ended conflict. The Iranians may disagree. Are you prepared for a protracted war?
Well, anything can happen in conflict. We acknowledge that. But the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military, nearly unlimited. So Iran, in that sense, has a choice. But we've made it very clear to them, this is nuclear sites, this is nuclear capabilities, this is the line that the president set, and we set that back. Now is the time to come forward for peace. But I think one of the takeaways from this as well is the unprecedented level of ongoing cooperation. I can't speak highly enough of the chairman and his staff and General Kurilla in CENTCOM, what they've done to look around the corner, to pre-position, to understand how an operation like this comes together. The scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away of almost any American if you had an opportunity to watch it in real time. And I think Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America in Missouri overnight, completely undetected over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud of how this building operated, of the precision, the sensitivity, and the professionalism of the troops involved in this effort. I will take one more. We'll take one more question. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Concerning the justification for these strikes, in March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their threat assessment, concluding, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Caine has not authorized the nuclear programs he suspended in 2003, unquote. So what new intelligence does the U.S. have since then that the Iranians have changed their position on nuclear weapons? And does this new intelligence come from U.S. sources and methods, or are we getting this information from other countries?
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program, and obviously collective self-defense of ourselves and our allies. So he looked at all of it, understood the nature of the threat, and took bold action I think the American people would expect in a commander-in-chief. That's all we've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Once again, you're watching this press conference happening at the Pentagon right now, getting extraordinary details from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, talking about these planes, these American B-2 stealth bombers flying from the middle of America in Missouri, undetected in the darkness of night, and carrying out this strike against Iran. Let's go ahead and bring in Colonel Steve Ganyard, who is our, forgive me, we're going to speak with Colonel Steve Ganyard right now. And Colonel, I just wanted to bring you back into this because we were getting more of these details from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs there, talking about this 18-hour flight, multiple refuelings. And he said, remarkably, though, as they arrived, that they're currently unaware of any shots fired at U.S. forces going in, and then said Iran's fighters did not fly.
Yeah, Whit, most of the Iranian Air Force has been destroyed. So we've seen pictures of ancient F-14s, ancient F-5s being destroyed. Most of the airfields within Iran have been cratered by Israel. And so we also know that back during October of last year that the strikes that the Israelis made on Iran took out most of the air defenses. So the air defenses within Iran have been beaten down not only in the past 10 days, but months ago. And so this made it, I won't say simple, but it made the planning effort that the U.S. undertook a bit more straightforward. So very little air defense, nobody shot. They had the element of surprise. They faked out the whole world where these B-2s were coming from and when they were coming.
And Steve, I also wanted to ask you, this is a question that I know many Americans have, and we heard it in the press conference there. You know, what about a prolonged conflict with Iran? And is President Trump prepared for that? And Secretary Hegseth says the mission has not been about regime change. And he said this is most certainly not open-ended. So then how does the Pentagon prepare for the days to come and potential retaliation from Iran?
With the Iranians have a decision to make here, and that is, do they come back after the U.S. and risk the whole might of the U.S. military joining the fight with Israel? If they go after U.S. troops in countries in the Persian Gulf, say Saudi Arabia or Qatar, they risk pulling those countries and eventually the UN into a broader conflict. So the U.S. has put unprecedented amount of military power within the region. Soon we will have 3 aircraft carriers in the region. That hasn't happened since 2003. We've put hundreds of aircraft into the region. And so the amount of U.S. military capability is more than enough to take care of any potential threat or any kind of retaliation or retribution that might come from Iran.
Steve Ganyard, stand by as we continue our coverage. Once again, just important to point out some of these details that we got from this press briefing. More than 125 aircraft participated in this mission. They also said that this was led by the United States, an operation only involving the United States, and that they were not working with the Israelis in this attack, although they did acknowledge some of the things that took place ahead of time as the Israelis and the Iranians have been going back and forth. This is some file footage that you're seeing of these B-2 bombers that carried out this historic mission, the largest strike using these bombers in history. Also, the first use of the massive ordnance penetrators, those MOPs. Those were the bunker-busting bombs, 30,000 pounds that they said that they dropped on multiple nuclear facilities. And the United States, the only country in the world that possesses this device. We know that there was a massive campaign effort from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try to get President Trump to approve this operation. And there you're seeing that animation of how these sorts of devices worked and were able to get deep underground and destroy some of these facilities. We are going to continue our coverage here on ABC News. We're going to go to Rachel Scott, our senior political correspondent in Washington, who is there at the White House. Rachel, you've been watching this press conference, no doubt. And overnight, we know that President Trump was at the White House in the Situation Room with his top advisors watching this plan play out.
He was, Whit, and it was notable hearing from Secretary Hegseth there saying that this is not about a regime change. This is about eliminating the possibility of Iran having a nuclear weapon and still making that inroads for Iran to have peace at this moment. Operation Midnight Hammer. This is an operation that was carried out in the darkness of night with only a handful of U.S. officials knowing. Secretary Hegseth saying that this took months and weeks of planning so that the U.S. could be able to operate and carry this strike out as soon as the president gave the green light. During this Pentagon briefing, Hegseth was asked about the president setting this 2-week deadline. We know ultimately he ended up moving forward with that green light within a matter of 2 days. Secretary Hegseth saying that the president saw a window there to act and that he wanted to do so in the best interests of the United States. When we talk about this operation, it is striking to hear about the level of detail and the decoy, the deception operations that were underway, deploying that group off to the Pacific for the deception effort so that this group could move in around 2 a.m. In local time in Iran, about 6:40 p.m. Eastern here. Then we would learn about these attacks that were carried out from the president himself via Truth Social posts probably about an hour after that. We also heard from the secretary there saying that forces are now remaining on high alert and they are ready to respond to any attacks, which the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says would be a very poor decision. Hegseth saying that the fact that these strike groups would undetected is something that Iran should now be folding into its calculation. But again, Hegseth making it clear this is not about a regime change. This is about making sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. I will tell you, Whit, this is something that the president campaigned on, this idea that he was going to stay out of these foreign conflicts. This is something the president's own party was divided on, whether or not the United States should get involved. And while they are claiming that this is successful, it is at odds with what the president did campaign as he was elected in November.
Rachel Scott for us, so we appreciate it. I want to get out to Ian Pannell, who's in Tel Aviv. Ian, we know that Iran has promised retaliation. We have seen some missiles already heading towards Israel and some damage and casualties so far this morning.
Yeah, that's right. Multiple strikes. We think something in the region of 25 ballistic missiles were fired from Iran towards Israel. This was just hours after the U.S. strikes in the region. This is a site of one of the strikes. In actual fact, the missile landed behind us. The area is too dangerous. We're not allowed to kind of get in there, but the buildings there have been totally razed, the facade blown out, massive destruction on the ground. They're trying to make that site safe. This actually was a retirement home for the elderly, and as you can see, the front of that, again, all the windows have been totally blown out. As you say, Iran definitely vowing response. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps saying there will be heavy responses, and also that U.S. military bases in the region have doubled their vulnerability. Now, we heard the chairman of the Joint Chiefs there talking about force protection. He wouldn't go into details of what that was, but the most vulnerable parts in the region for U.S. forces will undoubtedly be in Iraq. When the U.S. assassinated the head of the Quds forces, General Soleimani, there was a military response from Iran. It fired towards U.S. forces, not just inside Iraq, but also towards U.S. forces in Syria. That is something they want to avoid. And we've seen very clear, very categoric warnings from the U.S., from Secretary of Defense Hegseth, and from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs that the U.S. will respond. However, the enemy gets a vote, as the military like to say, and we have to wait and see. I think for the Iranians, they will continue to certainly target here in Israel. I think Israel is clearly more vulnerable than U.S. forces in the region. We've already seen multiple strikes here. Israeli forces have also attacked. One other thing I want to bring up, the Secretary of Defense Hegseth talks about incredible and overwhelming success, saying we devastated Iran's nuclear program. I just want to inject some caution in there. We need to wait for the battlefield damage assessment to be conducted. This is a standard military procedure where after an attack, whether it involves troops or it involves aerial weapons, you then have to go and see how successful it's been. And certainly the Israeli Defense Forces talking this morning say that they want to see what the impacts of this bombing has been, what the effect has been. Of course, Israel has been targeting Iran's nuclear program for 10 days now, and there are still other sites that it feels it needs to attack. And also, I think, particularly worrying for the United States, we now have these satellite images showing multiple trucks gathered at the Fordo nuclear site inside Iran, this very heavy, deep underground facility that the MOT was being used, this bunker-busting bomb was being used to try and penetrate. What were those trucks doing? Were they extracting material or equipment from that site? It's something that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, say they're looking at. So I think we just have to hold off on judgment about how successful it will be, and therefore hold off on deciding whether or not this was a one-off for the United States or whether it signifies something much broader. One last point. Again, if you listen to what Secretary of Defense Hegseth had to say, this was very different from what we heard politically from Donald Trump and those around him. This sounded like America projecting its power around the world, as we've seen in past administrations. I think certainly for some that will be concerning, but it raises questions. It's easy to get into a conflict, but sometimes very difficult to get out of it, guys.
And Ian, you noted this too, despite the fact that Israel is likely to be the target of some of this Iranian retaliation. This is something behind the scenes that Prime Minister Netanyahu very much wanted, and there was a pressure campaign on President Trump to join this conflict and specifically to launch these bunker-busting bombs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he wants it for a number of reasons. He wants it because, as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense Hegseth pointed out, that no one has the same kind of power as the U.S. No one has these massive ordnance penetrators like the U.S. has. No one has the B-2s. So only the U.S. could have conducted this mission, even if it's not clear at the moment how successful it's been. Again, satellite images now starting to emerge, certainly showing huge craters at those sites. But it's important morally, it's important militarily, and it's important politically. Israel has been making this point, and the Israeli president said this to me just a few days ago, that the potential threat, or in their words, the direct threat from Iran, is a threat not just to Israel, but also a threat to Europe, to all the allies, to the G7 countries, and to the United States. I think it's also worth remembering, of course, because everyone's talking about the dangers of an Iranian nuclear bomb. The assessment from the US intelligence community was they were not in the process of making a nuclear device. And even Israel is not saying that they were. What it's saying is they were getting to a position where they'd enriched enough uranium that they were within weeks of potentially being able to do so. And for Israel, that has faced what it sees as existential threats from Hamas, from Hezbollah. This, in some senses, was a natural progression to also go after Iran. The government here trying to secure not just all its borders, but any threat to the nation, trying to re-establish that promise forged in the embers of the Second World War of never again. And that is part of what we're seeing now. Is this the end of it for Israel? I don't think so. We're not hearing that from the Israeli forces. They're going to continue to try and degrade Iran's nuclear infrastructure, but also its ballistic missile structure, as I said, would be used to deliver any potential nuclear weapons, but is also being used to attack sites like this, civilian populations across Israel. So I don't think we've seen the end of this. I think the question for the US is they've got into this. Can they extricate themselves quite quickly? A lot depends on the response from Iran, and a lot depends on the battlefield damage assessment that's yet to be conducted. Whit?
Many open-ended questions here. Ian, panel for us, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Let's bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. We're talking more about the threats, potential threats to the homeland, Pierre. It's not only what retaliation Iran itself could carry out, but sleeper cells, terrorism, or lone wolves.
Well, many Americans are waking up to this news, and the obvious question for them is, what does it mean for the homeland? And there's some obvious concerns that U.S. officials have been worried about for quite some time. In fact, when Israel began this current campaign against Iran, the U.S. Homeland Security put out an urgent notice to the nation's infrastructure leaders, warning about the potential for cyber attacks, the electrical grid, the energy grid, the financial sector. Iran has those capabilities and its proxies as well. So there was concern about that. They put out a notice warning the infrastructure community to prepare and make sure that their computer defense systems were working very well. Also, there's been long-standing questions about, does Iran have capabilities in terms of sleeper cells inside the United States? That's an open, ongoing question. The DOJ has brought recent cases involving Iranian operatives inside the United States who were acting at behest of the Iranian government, including planning plots of violence, including against President Trump. So that is an ongoing concern. And then obviously, just the generic reaction of people who are unstable, who see something like the U.S. bombing a Muslim country in the Middle East, and a response from so-called lone wolves.
And Pierre, I want to follow up on that because we've seen some of those attacks recently, and we know that law enforcement agencies across the country were already operating on high alert.
Well, this has been perhaps the most concentrated period of attacks in the United States in terms of politically motivated attacks. We saw the New Year's Day attack involving a person supporting ISIS. And then most recently, right here in the nation's capital, two Israeli diplomats gunned down outside of a museum by a man chanting Free Palestine. So right now, U.S. authorities are operating at a fever pitch with so many different kinds of threats to respond to. This only adds to that situation.
Thomas Forrest, thank you. I want to bring in our Ann Flaherty, who has been following a lot of these details out of Washington. Aaron, we learned a lot about this operation and how these planes flew in the darkness of night, undetected from the continental U.S., this 18-hour flight being refueled multiple times. And it appears the Iranian aircraft didn't even get off the ground to intercept them. What more are you learning from your sources?
Yeah, we just heard that this was a mission of extraordinary secrecy. These B-2 bombers taking off, as you said, just after midnight. Many of us were tracking a separate fleet of B-2 bombers heading in a different direction. What we were told at this hour is that they use this misdirection, the secrecy, to try to catch the Iranians off guard. 14 bombs were dropped ultimately on this site, this Iranian nuclear site. Now, this was a risky mission. We had heard from experts in advance of this who said, look, we don't know a lot about this nuclear site, Fordo. We don't know the precise mechanics of how it's built, the concrete, the structure that they have in place. You don't want to poke the hornet's nest. They wanted to make sure that they could do it absolutely perfect. We just heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He says that it went off without a hitch, that the Iranians did not shoot back, and that the U.S. pilots returned safe. Now the questions are all about what happened happens next. And if U.S. troops are going to be caught in the crosshairs, if Iranians can try to attack them, the Iranians, of course, telling us that every American is at risk right now, Whit.
And can you talk more about the historic nature of this strike that the U.S. carried out? And not only did we launch a military strike really for the first time directly on Iranian soil, one of our longtime adversaries, but the use of these B-2 bombers and the fact that these types of bunker-busting bombs were used in testing, but this is really the first time that it's played out on a military battlefield.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We've never used these types of bombs in a real-life tactical situation. These are bombs that have only been tested. They said that they were confident in their ability to destroy the nuclear facility, that they wouldn't have done it without that confidence. But of course, you don't know what you don't know, as people have said in the past. They say that this is an absolutely historic flight because you're talking about the largest B-2 bombing mission in history. They flew for the longest period of time since 2001, of course, when those 9/11 attacks had happened. They say that, this is a historic mission. We also heard from Defense Secretary Hegseth, who said, don't interpret this as an open-ended mission. He said it was very clear we wanted to strike these targets and we wanted to be done. He does not see this as anything related to regime change. Of course, that's something that the MAGA movement is very sensitive to. A lot of them do not support the idea of going into war. They're very worried about dragging U.S. troops into this conflict.
Yeah, President Trump said that he would end foreign wars and would not get us into forever wars. Ann Flaherty for us, thank you. I want to go back to Rachel Scott, who's been covering this for us, because this does raise a lot of questions. I think that people, not only Democrats, but Republicans, many of Trump's supporters are going to want to see more evidence of this imminent threat that was taking place. You mentioned earlier this difference in opinion, this distinction about how close Iran actually was and how much they were intending to build a bomb, and this difference that was playing out between Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and then President Trump said that she was flat out wrong. So that's something that the White House and the administration are going to, as we verify and get more information about the destruction that took place, they're going to have to present that evidence to the American people going forward.
This is a moment in the Republican Party that will be remarkable to see whether Republicans on Capitol Hill get behind the president and these strikes that he decided to move forward with, now plunging the United States directly into this conflict, or whether they express a concern or they distance themselves from the president. We know that in leading up to this, as we were reporting that the president was warming up to this idea. Just a week ago, I spoke to him over the phone. He said it was possible, but the United States at that point was not going to get involved. We saw that change day by day. The president abruptly leaving the G7 summit early. He traveled back here to the White House. He met with his national security team inside of the Situation Room day after day. Sources were telling us that he was becoming more open to this idea. Well, during that period of time, I was told the president was also getting a range of calls from several different Republicans on Capitol Hill. Some were on the side that were pushing the president to join Israel and try to help and carry out a strike to get directly involved, and others were cautioning against it, reminding the president of that promise that he made on the campaign trail. And so this will be a moment for the Republican Party. So far, Republican leaders, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader John Thune, they have come out in support of the president. It will also be a test here of our relationships with our allies. We know the president left the G7 summit early, and now he is preparing to head to the NATO summit. From what we know right now, the president's still planning to leave for that trip this week. But we are already hearing from our allies, including France. Their foreign minister putting out a statement today urging the parties to exercise restraint, pushing for peace here. And so it remains to be seen whether or not our allies believe that this was a good decision by the United States to get directly involved, something that we know Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was putting a lot of pressure on the president to do it.
Rachel Scott, once again, thank you. I want to go back to Pierre Thomas because, Pierre, I think that a lot of Americans are asking themselves, well, what is this going to mean for us? What is this going to look like in the days ahead? How does the raising of the alert level impact us here at home? And we know that there's going to be some posturing from law enforcement agencies across the country. They're bolstering up their personnel. But what could that look like for people here at home?
Well, two things. We're seeing in New York City and here in the nation's capital sort of stepped up police presence, particularly at Jewish facilities and houses of worship. Law enforcement officials saying last night that they were monitoring, getting this information in real time, just like we were. D.C. police on high alert. They've been that way for some time, especially since this recent spate of attacks by Israel on Iran. So I think you will see a lot more police presence, particularly in high impact places here in Washington, on the Washington Mall as well. They want to send a sign of deterrence, that they are prepared in case something were to happen. Also, I think the FBI in the past, in these kinds of situations, they have a list of people that they are concerned about. Sometimes they do simple knock on the door, like we're watching you, don't try anything. Those kind of things do take place. So for the foreseeable future, given this heightened threat environment, perhaps the most intense since 9/11, you're going to see throughout this country, particularly in major cities, a large-scale law enforcement presence at key locations.
Pierre Thomas, thank you. And once again, just to go back through some of the things that we learned this morning at that press conference from the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, saying that this was an overwhelming success, this mission that was carried out at 3 separate nuclear facilities in Iran, saying Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. The Secretary was pressed on what this means going forward, and he said the mission has not been about regime change. This is most certainly not open-ended. Speaking of the conflict in the days ahead, focus on a clear mission on the destruction of Iran's nuclear capability. I'd like to go back to our Ann Flaherty, who's been covering a lot of these details that we've been getting, and I think the extraordinary nature of this 18-hour flight, the refuelings, the decoy, the deception, the element of surprise. I mean, many of us yesterday, as we were getting ready for World News Tonight, we were following, literally tracking some of these B-2 bombers as we thought that, a group was going to Guam, but really this was part of the misdirection, and we were all being deceived in the process.
Yeah, and that was something that the defense secretary owned up to. He said this was an operation of incredible secrecy and misdirection. Really astounding there. And think about it, it was just Thursday that Caroline Leavitt had gone to the podium at the White House and said the president will make his decision within 2 weeks. Now, she did say within 2 weeks, which meant that we knew this could happen at any time. At the same time, the world did seem to take a breath, thinking that they did have time. And we asked what has changed. Was there something that the intelligence was showing that brought a sense of urgency to this? We haven't gotten clear answers on this, but the Pentagon making very clear that they did not want anyone to leak news of this operation. Because, of course, if you think about it, these are U.S. pilots over Iran. If anything had gone wrong, it would have been extraordinary. And it would have been, for a president who has promised that he would not bring this nation into war. So, incredible secrecy. As I say, operational security was clean. You heard it in the press briefing just now. The defense secretary, very proud, he said, of this building.
And I just wanted to follow up, too. We have thousands of troops in the region and really an unprecedented mobilization there. Do we know what's being done to protect them now?
Well, they've been moving aircraft and ships into position before this attack even happened. They said that this has been planned for weeks, even months. They've been positioning troops in the region to make sure that those 40,000 troops in the region are protected. Whit?
Ann Flaherty, thank you so much. We appreciate it. You've been watching continuing coverage as we've been getting more information about these U.S. nuclear strikes on Iran. I'm Whit Johnson in New York. We'll send you back to regular programming.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
ABC's David Muir, the most watched newscast in America.